Hello, welcome back to Boring Fantasy for Sleep. Tonight is episode 2 of The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany. In episode 1, Alveric crossed the border of Elfland for the first time. He carried a sword made of no earthly metal, forged by the witch Ziroonderel on the hill above Earl. He stepped through the wall of twilight, and the sounds of the fields we know grew dim, and then silent, and in their place were the wonders of Elfland, the pale blue mountains, the golden air, the silver spires of the palace only told of in song. Tonight he reaches the palace, and what happens there, and what he brings back with him across the border. This is episode 2, The Spires of the Palace, chapters 4, 5, and 6.
Chapter 4. Alveric comes back to Earth after many years. Back through the guarding wood went Alveric and Lirazel, she only looking once more at those flowers and lawns, seen only by the furthest travelling fancies of poets in deepest sleep, then urging Alveric on, he choosing the way past trees he had disenchanted. And she would not let him delay even to choose his path, but kept urging him away from the palace that is only told of in song. And the other trees began to come, lumbering towards them, from beyond the lustreless, unromantic line that Alveric's sword had smitten, looking queerly as they came at their stricken comrades, whose listless branches drooped without magic or mystery. And as the moving trees came nearer, Lirazel would hold up her hand, and they all halted and came on no more. And still she urged upon Alveric to hasten. She knew her father would climb the brazen stairs of one of those silver spires. She knew he would soon come out onto a high balcony. She knew what rune he would chant. She heard the sound of his footsteps ascending, ringing now through the wood. They fled over the plain beyond the wood, all through the blue, everlasting elfin day. And again, she looked over her shoulder and urged Alveric on. The Elf King's feet boomed slow on the 1,000 brazen steps, and she hoped to reach the barrier of twilight, which on that side was smoky and dull. When suddenly, as she looked for the 100th time at the distant balconies of the glittering spires, she saw a door begin to open high up, above the palace only told of in song. She cried, "Alas!" to Alveric, but at that moment the scent of briar roses came drifting to them from the fields we know. Alveric knew not fatigue, for he was young, nor she, for she was ageless. They rushed forward, he taking her hand. The Elf King lifted his beard, and just as he began to intone a rune that only once may be uttered, against which nothing from our fields can avail, they were through the frontier of twilight, and the rune shook and troubled those lands in which Lirazel walked no longer. When Lirazel looked upon the fields, we know, as strange to her as once they have been to us, their beauty delighted her. She laughed to see the haystacks, and loved their quaintness. A lark was singing, and Lirazel spoke to it, and the lark seemed not to understand, but she turned to other glories of our fields, for all were new to her, and forgot the lark. It was curiously no longer the season of bluebells, for all the foxgloves were blooming, and the May was gone, and the wild roses were there. Alveric never understood this. It was early morning, and the sun was shining, giving soft colours to our fields, and Lirazel rejoiced in those fields of ours, at more common things than one might believe there were amongst the familiar sights of Earth's every day. So glad was she, so gay with her cries of surprise and her laughter, that there seemed thenceforth to Alveric a beauty that he had never dreamed of in buttercups, and a humour in carts that he never had thought of before. Each moment she found with a cry of joyous discovery some treasure of earth's that he had not known to be fair. And then, as he watched her bringing a beauty to our fields more delicate even than that the wild roses brought, he saw that her crown of ice had melted away. And thus she came from the palace that may only be told of in song, over the fields of which I need not tell, for they were the familiar fields of earth, that the ages change but little, and only for a while, and came at evening with Alveric to his home. All was changed in the castle of Earl. In the gateway they met a guardian, whom Alveric knew. The man wondered to see them. In the hall and upon the stairway they met some that tended the castle, who turned their heads in surprise. Alveric knew them also, but all were older, and he saw that quite 10 years must have passed away during that one blue day he had spent in Elfland. Who does not know that this is the way of Elfland? And yet, who would not be surprised if they saw it happen, as Alveric saw it now? He turned to Lirazel and told her how 10 or 12 years were gone. But it was as though a humble man who had wed an earthly princess should tell her he had lost sixpence. Time had had no value or meaning to Lirazel, and she was untroubled to hear of the 10 lost years. She did not dream what time means to us here. They told Alveric that his father was long since dead, and one told him how he died happy, without impatience, trusting to Alveric to accomplish his bidding, for he had known somewhat of the ways of Elfland, and knew that those that traffic twixt here and there must have something of that calm in which Elfland forever dreams. Up the valley, ringing late, they heard the blacksmith's work. This blacksmith was he who had been the spokesman of those who went once to the long red room to the Lord of Earl. And all these men yet lived. For time, though, it moved over the vale of Earl, as over all fields we know, moved gently, not as in our cities. Thence Alveric and Lirazel went to the holy place of the Freer, and when they found him, Alveric asked the Freer to wed them with Christen rites. And when the Freer saw the beauty of Lirazel flash mid the common things in his little holy place, for he had ornamented the walls of his house with knickknacks that he sometimes bought at the fairs, he feared at once she was of no mortal line. And when he asked her whence she came, and she happily answered Elfland, the good man clasped his hands and told her earnestly how all in that land dwelt beyond salvation. But she smiled, for while in Elfland she had always been idly happy, and now she only cared for Alveric. The Freer went then to his books to see what should be done. For a long while he read in silence, but for his breathing, while Alveric and Lirazel stood before him. And at last he found in his book a form of service for the wedding of a mermaid that had forsaken the sea, though the good book told not of Elfland. And this, he said, would suffice, for that the mermaids dwelt equally with the elf-folk beyond thought of salvation. So he sent for his bell and such tapers as are necessary. Then, turning to Lirazel, he bade her forsake and forswear, and solemnly to renounce all things pertaining to Elfland, reading slowly out of a book the words to be used on this wholesome occasion. "Good Freer," Lirazel answered, "naught said in these fields can cross the barrier of Elfland, and well, that this is so, for my father has 3 runes that could blast this book when he answered one of its spells. Were any word able to pass through the frontier of twilight, I will spell no spells with my father. "But I cannot wed Christ a man," the Freer replied, "with one of the stubborn who dwell beyond salvation." Then Alveric implored her, and she said the say in the book. "Though my father could blast this spell," she added, "if it ever crossed one of his runes. And, the bell being now brought, and the tapers, the good man wedded them in his little house, with the rites that are proper for the wedding of a mermaid that hath forsaken the sea." Chapter 5. The wisdom of the Parliament of Earl. In those bridal days, the men of Earl came often to the castle, bringing gifts and felicitations. And in the evenings, they would talk in their houses of the fair things that they hoped for the Vale of Earl, on account of the wisdom of the thing they had done when they spoke with the old lord in his long red room. There was Narl the blacksmith, who had been their leader. There was Guhich, who first had thought of it, after speaking with his wife, an upland farmer of clover pastures near Earl. There was Nehik, a driver of horses. There were 4 vendors of beeves, and Oth, a hunter of deer, and Vlel, the master ploughman. All these and 3 men more had gone to the Lord of Earl, and made that request that had set Alveric on his wanderings. And now they spoke of all the good that would come of it. They had all desired that the Vale of Earl should be known among men, as was, they felt, its desert. They had looked in histories. They had read books treating of pasture, yet seldom found mention at all of the Val they loved. And one day, Guhich had said, "Let all us people be ruled in the future by a magic lord, and he shall make the name of the valley famous, and there shall be none that have heard not the name of Earl." And all had rejoiced and had made a parliament, and it had gone, 12 men, to the Lord of Earl. And it had been as I have told. So now they spoke over their mead of the future of Earl, and its place among other valleys, and of the reputation that it should have in the world. They would meet and talk in the great forge of Narl, and Narl would bring them mead from an inner room, and Threll would come in late from his work in the woods. The mead was of clover honey, heavy and sweet, and when they had sat a while in the warm room, talking of daily things of the valley and uplands, they would turn their minds to the future, seeing as through a golden mist the glory of Earl. One praised the beeves, another the horses, another the good soil, and all looked to the time when other lands should know the great mastery among valleys that was held by the Valley of Earl, and time that brought these evenings bore them away, moving over the Vale of Earl as over all fields we know, and it was spring again and the season of bluebells. And one day, in the prime of the wild anemones, it was told that Alveric and Lirazel had a son. Then all the people of Earl lit a fire next night on the hill, and danced about it, and drank mead and rejoiced. All day they had dragged logs and branches for it from a wild wood near, and the glow of the fire was seen in other lands. Only on the pale blue peaks of the mountains of Elfland no gleam of it shone, for they are unchanged by aught that can happen here. And when they rested from dancing round their fires, they would sit on the ground and foretell the fortune of Earl, when it should be ruled over by this son of Alveric, with all the magic he would have from his mother. And some said he would lead them to war, and some said to deeper ploughing, and all foretold a better price for their beeves. None slept that night for dancing and for telling a glorious future, and for rejoicing at the things they foretold. And above all, they rejoiced that the name of Earl should be thenceforth known and honoured in other lands. Then Alveric sought for a nurse for his child, all through the valley and upland, and not easily found any worthy of having the care of one that was of the royal line of Elfland, and those that he found were frightened of the light, as though not of our earth or sky, that seemed to shine at times in the baby's eyes. And in the end, he went one windy morning up the hill of the lonely witch, and found her sitting idly in her doorway, having nothing to curse or bless. "Well," said the witch, "did the sword bring you fortune?" "Who knows," said Alveric, "what brings fortune, since we cannot see the end?" And he spoke wearily, for he was weary with age, and never knew how many years had gone over him on the day he travelled to Elfland. Far more it seemed than had passed on that same day over Earl. "Aye," said the witch, "who knows the end but we?" "Mother witch," said Alveric, "I wedded the king of Elfland's daughter." "That was a great advancement," said the old witch. "Mother witch," said Alveric, "we have a child, and who shall care for him?" "No human task," said the witch. "Mother witch," said Alveric, "will you come to the Vale of Earl and care for him, and be the nurse at the castle? For none but you in all these fields knows aught of the things of Elfland, except the princess, and she knows nothing of earth." And the old witch answered, "For the sake of the king I will come." So the witch came down from the hill with a bundle of queer belongings. And thus the child was nursed in the fields we know by one who knew songs and tales of his mother's country. And often, as they bent together over the baby, that aged witch and the Princess Lirazel would talk together, and afterwards, through long evenings, of things about which Alveric knew nothing. And for all the age of the witch, and the wisdom that she had stored in her 100 years, which is all hidden from man, it was nevertheless she who learned when they talked together, and the Princess Lirazel who taught. But of earth, and the ways of earth, Lirazel never knew anything. And this old witch that watched over the baby so tended him, and so soothed, that in all his infancy he never wept. For she had a charm for brightening the morning, and a charm for cheering the day, and a charm for calming a cough, and a charm for making the nursery warm and pleasant and eerie when the fire leaped up at the sound of it, from logs that she had enchanted, and sent large shadows of the things about the fire, quivering dark and merry over the ceiling. And the child was cared for by Lirazel and the witch, as children are cared for, whose mothers are merely human. But he knew tunes and runes besides, that other children hear not in fields we know. So the old witch moved about the nursery with her black stick, guarding the child with her runes. If a draught on windy nights shrilled in through some crack, she had a spell to calm it, and a spell to charm the song that the kettle sang, till its melody brought hints of strange news from mist-hidden places, and the child grew to know the mystery of far valleys that his eyes had never seen. And at evening she would raise her ebon stick, and, standing before the fire amongst all the shadows, would enchant them and make them dance for him. And they took all manner of shapes of good and evil, dancing to please the baby, so that he came to have knowledge not only of the things with which earth is stored, pigs, trees, camels, crocodiles, wolves, and ducks, good dogs and the gentle cow, but of the darker things also that men have feared, and the things they have hoped and guessed. Through those evenings, the things that happen and the creatures that are passed over those nursery walls, and he grew familiar with the fields we know. And on warm afternoons, the witch would carry him through the village, and all the dogs would bark at her eerie figure. but durst not come too close, for a page boy behind her carried the ebon stick. And dogs, that know so much, that know how far a man can throw a stone, and if he would beat them, and if he durst not, knew also that this was no ordinary stick. So they kept far away from that queer black stick in the hand of the page, and snarled, and the villagers came out to see. And all were glad when they saw how magical a nurse the young heir had. For here, they said, is the witch Ziroonderel, and they declared that she would bring him up amongst the true principles of wizardry, and that in his time there would be magic that would make all their valley famous. And they beat their dogs until they slunk indoors. But the dogs clung to their suspicions still, so that when the men were gone to the forge of Narl, and their houses were quiet in the moonlight, and Narl's windows glowed, and the mead had gone round, and they talked of the future of Earl, more and more voices joining in the tale of its coming glory. On soft feet, the dogs would come out to the sandy street and howl. And to the high sunny nursery, Lirazel would come, bringing a brightness that the learned witch had not in all her spells, and would sing to her boy those songs that none can sing to us here, for they were learned the other side of the frontier of twilight, and were made by singers, all unvexed by time. And for all the marvel that there was in those songs, whose origin was so far from the fields we know, and in times remote from those that historians use, and though men wondered at the strangeness of them, when from open casements through the summer days they drifted over Earl, yet none wondered even at those, as she wondered at the earthly ways of her child, and all the little human things that he did more and more as he grew. For all human ways were strange to her, and yet she loved him more than her father's realm, or the glittering centuries of her ageless youth, or the palace that may be told of only in song. In those days, Alveric learned that she would never now grow familiar with earthly things, never understand the folk that dwelt in the valley, never read wise books without laughter, never care for earthly ways, never feel more at ease in the castle of Earl than any woodland thing that Threll might have snared and kept caged in a house. He had hoped that soon she would learn the things that were strange to her, till the little differences that there are between things in our fields and in Elfland should not trouble her any more. But he saw at last that the things that were strange would always so remain, and that all the centuries of her timeless home had not so lightly shaped her thoughts and fancies that they could be altered by our brief years here. When he had learned this, he had learned the truth. Between the spirits of Alveric and Lirazel lay all the distance there is between Earth and Elfland, and love bridged the distance, which can bridge further than that. Yet when for a moment on the golden bridge he would pause and let his thoughts look down at the gulf, all his mind would grow giddy, and Alveric trembled. What of the end, he thought, and feared lest it should be stranger than the beginning. And she did not see that she should know anything. Was not her beauty enough? Had not a lover come at last to those lawns that shone by the palace, only told of in song, and rescued her from her uncompanioned fate? And from that perpetual calm, was it not enough that he had come? Must she needs understand the curious things folk did? Must she never dance in the road, never speak to goats, never laugh at funerals, never sing at night? Why? What was joy for, if it must be hidden? Must merriment bow to dullness in these strange fields she had come to? And then, one day, she saw how a woman of Earl looked less fair than she had looked a year ago, Little enough was the change, but her swift eye saw it surely. And she went to Alveric crying to be comforted, because she feared that time in the fields we know might have power to harm that beauty that the long, long ages of Elfland had never dared to dim. And Alveric had said that time must have his way, as all men know. And where was the good of complaining? Chapter 6. The Rune of the Elf King. On the high balcony of his gleaming tower, the King of Elfland stood. Below him echoed yet the 1,000 steps. He had lifted his head to chant the rune that should hold his daughter in Elfland, and in that moment had seen her pass the murky barrier, which on this side, facing toward Elfland, is all lustrous with twilight, and on that side, facing towards the fields we know, is smoky and angry and dull. And now he had dropped his head till his beard lay mingled with his cape of ermine above his cerulean cloak, and stood there silently, sorrowful, while time passed swift as ever over the fields we know. And standing there all blue and white against his silver tower, aged by the passing of times of which we know nothing, before he imposed its eternal calm upon Elfland, he thought of his daughter amongst our pitiless years. For he knew, whose wisdom surpassed the confines of Elfland and touched our rugged fields, knew well the harshness of material things and all the turmoil of time. Even as he stood there, he knew that the years that assail beauty and the myriad harshnesses that vex the spirit were already about his daughter, and the days that remained to her now seemed scarce more to him, dwelling beyond the fret and ruin of time, than to us might seem a briar rose's hours, when plucked and foolishly hawked in the streets of a city. He knew that there hung over her now the doom of all mortal things. He thought of her perishing soon, as mortal things must, to be buried amongst the rocks of a land that scorned Elfland, and that held its most treasured myths to be of little account. And were he not the king of all that magical land, which held its eternal calm from his own mysterious serenity, he had wept to think of the grave in rocky earth, gripping that form that was so fair forever. Or else, he thought, she would pass to some paradise far from his knowledge, some heaven of which books told in the fields we know, for he had heard even of this. He pictured her on some apple-haunted hill, under blossoms of an everlasting April, through which flickered the pale gold halos of those that had cursed Elfland. He saw, though dimly for all his magical wisdom, the glory that only the blessed clearly see. He saw his daughter on those heavenly hills stretch out both arms, as he knew well she would, towards the pale blue peaks of her elfin home, while never one of the blessed heeded her yearning. And then, though he was king of all that land, that had its everlasting calm from him, he wept, and all Elfland shivered. It shivered as placid water shivers here, if something suddenly touches it from our fields. Then the king turned, and left his balcony, and went in great haste down his brazen steps. He came clanging to the ivory doors that shut the tower below, and through them came to the throne room of which only song may tell. And there he took a parchment out of a coffer, and a plume from some fabulous wing, and dipping the plume into no earthly ink, wrote out a rune on the parchment. Then, raising 2 fingers, he made the minor enchantment whereby he summoned his guard. And no guard came. I have said that no time passed at all in Elfland, yet the happening of events is in itself a manifestation of time, and no event can occur unless time pass. Now it is thus with time in Elfland. In the eternal beauty that dreams in that honeyed air. Nothing stirs or fades or dies. Nothing seeks its happiness in movement or change or a new thing, but has its ecstasy in the perpetual contemplation of all the beauty that has ever been, and which always glows over those enchanted lawns as intense as when first created by incantation or song. Yet, if the energies of the wizard's mind arose to meet a new thing, then that power that had laid its calm upon Elfland and held back time troubled the calm a while, and time for a while shook Elfland, cast anything into a deep pool from a land strange to it, where some great fish dreams, and green weeds dream, and heavy colours dream, and light sleeps. The great fish stirs, the colours shift and change, the green weeds tremble, the light wakes. The myriad things know slow movement and change, and soon the whole pool is still again. It was the same when Alveric passed through the border of twilight and right through the enchanted wood, and the king was troubled and moved, and all Elfland trembled. When the king saw that no guard came, he looked into the wood, which he knew to be troubled, through the deep mass of the trees that were quivering yet with the coming of Alveric. He looked through the deeps of the wood and the silver walls of his palace, for he looked by enchantment, and there he saw the 4 knights of his guard lying stricken upon the ground, with their thick elvish blood hanging out through slits in their armour. And he thought of the early magic whereby he had made the eldest, with a rune all newly inspired, before he had conquered time. He passed out through the splendour and glow of one of his flashing portals, and over a gleaming lawn, and came to the fallen guard, and saw the trees still troubled. "There has been magic here," said the king of Elfland. And then, though he only had 3 runes that could do such a thing, and though they only could be uttered once, and one was already written upon parchment to bring his daughter home, he uttered the second of his most magical runes over that elder knight that his magic had made long ago. And in the silence that followed the last words of the rune, the rents in the moon-bright armour all clicked shut at once, and the thick, dark blood was gone, and the knight rose live to his feet. And the Elf King now had only 1 rune left that was mightier than any magic we know. The other 3 knights lay dead, and having no souls, their magic returned again to the mind of their master. He went back then to his palace, while he sent the last of his guard to fetch him a troll, dark brown of skin and 2 or 3 feet high. The trolls are a gnomish tribe that inhabit Elfland. And soon there was a scamper in the throne room that may only be told of in song, and a troll lit by the throne on its 2 bare feet, and stood before its king. The king gave it the parchment with the rune written thereon, saying, "Scamper hence, and pass over the end of the land, until you come to the fields that none know here, and find the Princess Lirazel, who is gone to the haunts of men, and give her this rune, and she shall read it, and all shall be well." And the troll scampered thence, and soon the troll was come, with long leaps to the frontier of twilight. Then nothing moved in Elfland any more, and motionless on that splendid throne, of which only song may speak, sat the old king, mourning in silence. That is the end of tonight's reading. Alveric has come back through the border, and he has not come back alone. Lirazel is in the fields we know for the first time. She has left immortality behind her and stepped into time. And the witch Ziroonderel has seen her and said the thing she said. She has come from too far. Episode 3. Lirazel blows away. Moth is asleep. you can be too.